Today, we're installing our Supercharged Cobra Aluminator engine and 6-speed transmission in Rolling Thunder. And we're boxing the frame while adding speed holes. Then we'll come up with a plan for adding the front suspension and the fuel tank. It's all today here on Trucks.
Hey guys, welcome to Trucks. Well, today we're going to be assembling the drivetrain of Project Rolling Thunder, and hopefully for the last time. And that means installing our new flywheel and clutch, setting up our hydraulic throwout bearing, and hanging the 6-speed off the back of our blown Fore 6 here. And by the end of the day, we're going to drop the whole thing down in between the frame rails.
And hopefully, by the time Ryan has got the engine and transmission assembly ready to drop down in between these frame rails, we've got these boxing plates at least ready to tack in. Although, right here where our IRS is mounted in, it's going to be pretty stiff. But the rest of it, like we showed you before, very flexy. Although Ford did a nice job of boxing up until here, there's this vast expanse in the middle that we've got to do something about. Now, these Simpson speed holes aren't just for appearance. Check this out. This is substantial. That's a lot of weight that we're dropping and not sacrificing any rigidity. Plus, it allows us access in between the rails to run fuel lines, electrical harnesses, things like that. And it's going to look pretty darn cool doing it.
Now, for our application, we knew we were going to need a better than stock replacement clutch. So we went to Summit Racing and picked up some parts from Centerforce. Now, the disc itself is a dual friction unit with a segmented carbon composite lining that'll keep heat down while increasing torque capacity. And the pressure plate features aircraft-grade billet aluminum and a heat-treated and replaceable friction surface. It also features their patented ball bearing activated diaphragm and standard Centerforce centrifugal weight system. That'll increase clamping load as RPM increases while still maintaining reasonable pedal pressure. Now, the aluminum flywheel we picked up is from Centerforce as well. It's got a mechanically retained starter ring, and just like the pressure plate, it's SFI certified and has the heat-treated and replaceable friction surface. Now, these parts are designed for specific road racing applications along with drag racing. And while they do cost a little bit more, well, they definitely have benefits. The engine's going to rev faster, it's easier to match revs while shifting, and the engine's just going to plain old accelerate faster due to the lower inertia. Now, we also picked up a billet steel flywheel for comparison's sake because we wanted to show you the weight difference. Check this out. Now, the steel flywheel weighs in at nearly 30 pounds. Looks like 28 to be exact. While the aluminum version looks like, well, it's less than 13 pounds. Now, to engage and disengage our new clutch, we picked up a hydraulic throwout bearing from American Powertrain. It features a threaded and adjustable sleeve with O-rings that seal to the transmission input shaft, along with an additional spacer so you can get this to work with a variety of transmission and clutch setups. Now, it's also got two braided stainless lines, one with a bleeder on it and the other that we're going to try to adapt to our factory Mazda clutch master cylinder. But before we install it, we've got some measurements to take. The first thing we're doing is installing the bearing assembly and making sure it's sitting flush. Then we can take our first measurement from the bell housing mating surface to the front of the throwout bearing. But before we can get our second measurement, there's some installation work we've got to do, like getting this pilot bearing installed in the back of the crankshaft. We're using an impact socket and a mallet. Next was the bell housing's separator plate. We followed that with the aluminum flywheel. And since this thing's going on for good, we use some red Loctite on the bolts to make sure it stays put. And after starting the bolts by hand, we're just snugging them down using the impact wrench. We follow that with an accurate torque. And by using an alignment tool, we can finish up the job getting the clutch disc and the new pressure plate installed. Now, the first step in tightening down our pressure plate bolts was to torque them to 33 foot-pounds. But these are torque to yield factory bolts, so we need to go an additional 60 degrees. But what if you don't have a torque angle gauge? Well, you can do like we're going to do and just use a template. Now, you can use a piece of cardboard or whatever you got laying around, but we had this old steering wheel kicking around and we're going to use it. Basically, we just marked off 60 degrees on the outside edge of the wheel. We'll line our ratchet handle up with the first hash mark and tighten till we hit the second mark. That way we know we've gone 60 degrees and it's done right. Now, once you get started in this process, you need to make sure that the crankshaft and the flywheel don't move. If it moves on you while you're turning the ratchet, you'll lose track of where you are and have to start all over again. Now, to make sure it stays put, Kevin's using a flywheel holding tool we picked up from Matco. And with the bell housing installed, we can get that second measurement we needed. And it goes from the bell housing to transmission mating surface to the very top point of the clutch fingers. And using these measurements and doing a little bit of math, we were able to properly set the height of the adjusting sleeve on the throwout bearing. It needs to have an 1/8 inch clearance in between the face of the throwout bearing and the clutch fingers to operate properly. Now, for our application, we ended up using the provided spacer sleeve. Now, the 2 O-rings on the throwout bearing are a snug fit, so if you need to, lubricate them with brake fluid only. One final measurement will verify we're still right on the money. That's it. Cool. And last but not least, we can install the bell housing, hopefully for the last time.
Up next, the magic of speed holes and why they work, and later, making mods to make it all fit. Stay tuned.
Hey, welcome back to Trucks. Well, Project Rolling Thunder is going to be one seriously fast little street truck with a rock-solid foundation that handles like a slot car. Part of creating that foundation involves boxing the frame all the way back. Now, boxing a chassis in is nothing new. There's really nothing new under the sun. This has been done for years, and it's quite a simple process. It involves using cardboard for templating, tracing out your design, transferring it to metal, and then trimming it out and welding it in place. It's pretty simple and can be done with basic tools, so this is a project you guys can do at home. Now, we're going to box all the way back, leave a little bit of room for suspension travel, and go all the way out the back. And since our new fuel cell is going to sit right here where the spare tire carrier now sits, obviously this boat anchor's got to go away before we can box these rails in. Now, weight transfer rearward is one of our main overall goals for this project. So we're going to have to buy back some of the weight that we're losing by removing this spare tire well. But the stainless steel fuel cell that we're installing in its place will more than compensate, especially when it's full. Now, cutting off the factory rivets is kind of fun, and it satisfies some weird primal urge. It's kind of like therapy. Now, with the big chunk out of the way, we can start making our template. Now, it doesn't really matter what you use as long as you can manipulate it and trim it and transfer it onto metal. I'm using some cardboard, but a lot of people use a lighter gauge. I just like this because I can move it around and it's a little more substantial. So basically what you want to do, put it up against your workpiece and trace around it. Now, the good thing about a frame is that the rails are usually symmetrical, so you can make one template and just use it for both sides. Now, templating is a simple process of tracing and trimming. And you want to start off cutting a little bit more than the outside edges of your project, and then dialing it back in, which is much easier to do on cardboard than it is steel. A little more forgiving, too, if you make a mistake. Now, the second most used tool in the whole shop is a black marker, and it's used to trace the pattern onto the 1/8 inch plate steel. Now, we're using our Torchmate CNC plasma table to cut the speed holes. We just found something round and the right size laying around in the shop to use as a template. So all of our boxing plates are cut out and trimmed, and the speed holes are cut out, and we're ready to tack these things in place. Wanted to show you something first. This is not just for aesthetics, although they do look cool. Check this out. These are the cutouts for about half of the boxing plates for one frame rail. and it's weighing in at 8 pounds. So you got 16 pounds worth of weight just from cutting the speed holes without sacrificing strength. If that doesn't sound like much, think about this. Got the rear bumper, the spare tire well, all the different brackets that we're pulling off. The point is, all of this matters. We get the strength that we want, and we get the weight reduction that we want, because every little bit helps. The frame's a little rusty, but nothing a couple passes with the grinding wheel won't fix. Then we're ready to tack our plates in. Now we're tacking all of the plates in individually, just in case we have some fine tuning or trimming to do. A tack's a heck of a lot easier to cut out than a fully burned in weld. Now the factory formed rails are not square or symmetrical, so you may have to do some forming. With everything looking good, you can make some fire.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, we've got most of our boxing plates welded in place, and we're grinding down those welds for a little bit more finished look. Now we've got some more plates to make and some more welding to do on both the cross members and the bottom side of the frame rails. But we're gonna take a break from this for a second, because we wanna drop our new engine and transmission down in between the frame rails and see where our transmission mount lines up.
Now the good news is we know the engine's going to fit, because essentially it's exactly the same engine block, and we're using the same isolators or engine mounts that we used on stage 1 with the Mercury Marauder engine. The problem here is that these are factory and they're rubber, and the aftermarket doesn't really support a Mercury Marauder mount. They have Cobra mounts, so we're going to have to switch to a Cobra mount later on. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. The important thing is knowing where this transmission mount's going to go and what we're going to have to fabricate to make this work. The other variable are these long tube headers. Mike and Joe over at Horsepower had these Flowtech long tubes kicking around, so we just thought we'd throw them on, see if they fit down between the rails, or if we're going to be locked into the factory Cobra cast iron manifolds that we know work.
And to make sure the transmission ends up in the right spot, we're installing our original Marauder engine mounts. Oh, yeah, that figures. Well, just like we suspected, these Flowtech long tubes are not going to work unless we do major surgery to the headers themselves or to the frame rails. So we'll probably end up going back with the manifolds we were running, which may not be that big of a deal. The Cobra manifolds are known to support major horsepower numbers, so I think we'll be okay. Good on my side. Good?
Yep.
All right, from the camera point of view, it may look like the mount's gonna line up with the cross member. But from where I'm sitting, we're a good 2 to 3 inches from having the holes line up, which is no big deal. We wanted to ditch this factory stamped cross member and replace it with a tubular one. And that way we can keep it tucked up in between the frame rails and keep it from hanging down too low, because ground clearance is gonna be pretty important with our new and much lower ride height. And we've discovered one more thing as well. There's a difference between the Marauder oil pan and the Ford Racing Illuminator pan, giving us a few more inches of clearance, allowing us to drop the engine down, lowering the all-important center of gravity. But there are plenty of other things to consider before we start making modifications to get that done. We've got to think about steering rack placement, exhaust clearance, and firewall and hood clearance for our now blower-equipped V8 engine. So we've got to drop the body back down before we get into all of that. But one thing we do know for sure, these factory suspension mounts or pickup points, they're going away. Now the upper control arm mounts came off pretty easily, but the lowers were a bear. They're about 1/4 inch thick and they're double layered. And it gives you an indication of how much more stress the lower arms are under in comparison to the uppers. Ford didn't want these things going anywhere.
You're watching Trucks. For a DVD copy of this episode, just go to PowerBlockTV.com and order your copy for just $5.95 plus shipping and handling. Start your own Trucks collection, delivered right to your door from the Power Block.
Hey guys, welcome back to the shop. Well, we've got all the control arm mounts cut off and the top of the frame rails ground clean. Now you might be asking yourself why we didn't utilize the existing pickup points, and it's for a couple of reasons. First off, the suspension kits available for late model Rangers focus more on aesthetics and just getting the truck to sit lower, and we're after precise handling. Plus, doing it this way, we can relocate the pickup points and move the front axle center line forward about an inch or inch and a half like we talked about before. Now, doing it this way is going to take a little bit more research, design, and engineering, but the time investment is going to pay off when this thing hits the track. And as far as components, we'll check these out. Now, the upper control arms are rod end equipped and adjustable so we can dial the suspension in. They utilize screw-in Chrysler ball joints. We attach them to these ball joint adapters we picked up from Whitby Motor Cars, and they allow us to bolt the upper arms to the SN95 Mustang spindle. Now, the tubular lower arms are from Factory 5 Racing and feature greasable polyurethane bushings and a built-in coilover mount. Now, by using the Mustang spindle, well, it gives us access to commonly available and reasonably affordable big brake kits. As far as this nasty hub goes, well, we're going to get a new one on there. This is just for mock-up.
And with our frame all boxed in, it really moves this project forward and allows us to do things like mount our custom fuel tank. This tank came from Rick's Hot Rod Shops, the Rick's Tank Division, and it's a custom-made stainless steel fuel cell that was made based on the measurements that we emailed to those guys. They also sent us some 90-degree bends. That way we can mount this thing at the location and height that we choose. Now, one of the best features of this fuel cell is the fact that it's internally baffled. And since we're going to beat on this thing on several road courses, this is going to take care of any fuel slosh issues that we may have and keep us from starving the fuel system. Now, speaking of fuel delivery, take a look at this. This is our new dual fuel pump setup that's made by Fore Precision Works. Now, this is a great upgrade for the 03 and 04 Supercharged Cobras, which makes it the perfect pump system for the arrangement that we've got here. It features two 255 LPH pumps and is fully billet aluminum. And since Fore Precision gives us the option, we opted for a return-style system with a Dash 8 fuel delivery and a Dash 6 return line. And this ought to make sure we're going to feed that hungry monster. Now, you've heard me say this 1,000 times, but one of the biggest secrets to a successful paint job is preparation. And that not only includes the materials that you're prepping with, but also safety equipment to handle the chemicals. Well, Kimberly-Clark has got you covered with items like these nitrile gloves that are solvent resistant and will keep your skin from absorbing hazardous chemicals. These surface prep wipes are almost 100% lint-free and are a great first step to wiping your surface down. Now, the last step before actually applying paint is to wipe down with tack rag. Well, Kimtech has a medium, low, and a no-tack tack rag, so you're good to go no matter what type of paint that you're prepping. And finally, when the paint's dry, Kimtech has a disposable microfiber that makes a great polishing cloth. Now, if you've got any questions over anything we've talked about, give us a shout. Thanks for watching Trucks. See you next time.